These trainings are created to help people restore urban natural areas to healthy ecosystems by removing invasive plants and planting native plants. Cascade Land Conservancy, Seattle Parks and Recreation, and Tahoma Audubon Society created these trainings with funding from the USDA Forest Service Urban and Community Forestry Program.
Hi, I'm Katie Cava, and welcome to the Volunteer Management Training video. This video is part of the Green Cities Partnership training series and is one of 5 videos that you'll be watching. Today we're going to go over volunteer management, and in this video we'll cover the topics of how to set your event up, how to organize your volunteers during the event, all the paperwork that you'll need for the event and after the event, and how to wrap your event up, plus basic tool safety. Now you might be wondering, why do we need a training on volunteer management? And that is a great question. Having a well-run event is going to increase the safety and the effectiveness of the work that you get done with your volunteers, and will also increase the likelihood that volunteers will come back to volunteer with you again. So let's get started, and remember throughout the video that our motto is be safe, have fun, and let's get the work done. Before your volunteers arrive, you're going to want to set up your welcome table in an easily seen place near your restoration site. You can start by setting up your event signs that direct volunteers to where you're going to be meeting. On your welcome table, make sure that you have water for your volunteers and any snack if you brought them. It's a great idea to have sunscreen if it's a sunny day. Have materials about the partnership or any programs that you're working with during the event, and this is also a great time that you can put out information about invasive species or any upcoming events that are happening in the future. Very important, make sure you have your sign-in sheets on the table and pens and pencils so that volunteers can sign in when they arrive. Have your camera in an easily accessible place so that you can take pictures before, during, and after the event, and make sure that your first aid kit is in a easily seen spot on the table, and later we'll be pointing that out to volunteers. Before your volunteers arrive, you're going to also want to set up your tools in an organized manner and have a count of them so that you can ensure at the end of your event they all come back. As volunteers arrive at your event, greet them with a smile and thank them for joining you today. Direct them to the registration or welcome table and have them sign in on the volunteer sign-in sheet. This is where all those pens come in handy. It's really important that every volunteer that joins you for the day signs in on this sheet. This is how we track how many volunteers come to the event, how many hours they're donating to the partnership, and also where we collect any contact info so that we can thank them later. In addition to collecting information, this form releases various entities of liability, and that can include any partners that we have for the event or landowners. Also keep in mind that if you have volunteers that are under 18 that are joining you without a parent, they may need to turn in a youth waiver form. If you're unsure about that, just check with the Green Cities representative. Before your volunteers get to work, bring them together to do an introduction talk. During your introduction talk, introduce the park that you're working at and the partnership that they're volunteering with. This is a great opportunity to talk about any previous work that's been done at the site, and also a great time to tie the work that's happening today in with the larger picture of the work that the partnership's doing. This is also a really important time to talk about site logistics, so where the bathrooms are located, where the water and snacks are going to be during the event, and also point out that first aid kit again so volunteers know where it's going to be during the event. Depending on your group dynamics, this is the perfect time to do an icebreaker. If you're looking for icebreaker ideas, you can talk to your Green Cities representative. Keep in mind that you're going to want to keep your introduction talk short and brief and quick because your volunteers are going to be really excited to start doing their restoration work. Working with hand tools during restoration events can be dangerous, especially when volunteers are not familiar with how to use them, or they are familiar with the tools that we're going to be using, but in a way that we don't necessarily use them at our volunteer events. So before any volunteers can use the tools, you're going to want to bring everybody together and do a basic tool safety talk. This talk shouldn't take any more than 10 minutes, and during the talk we're going to go over the basics of how to use the tools, what activities the tools are used for, and basic safety ideas around each tool. To start your tool safety talk off, you're going to want to pass out the gloves that you have for all your volunteers and have them put them on. Gloves are going to be worn throughout the whole entire volunteer event, and they're just a really good basic idea around safety. They're going to keep volunteers' hands safe and protect them against anything that their hands might come in contact with during the volunteer event. To start off your tool safety talk, you're going to want to talk about spacing of the volunteers during the restoration work. So an idea you're going to want to introduce is the idea of the blood circle, and a good way to demonstrate this is if a volunteer were to hold their tool and put their arms out and spin in 360 degrees, you wouldn't want any contact with another volunteer. So that's a good demonstration and a fun name for it. And this is a thing that as a volunteer event coordinator you're going to want to think about whenever you're watching your restoration volunteers do their work, and you can always ask them to spread out while they're working together. After you talk about the blood circle, you're going to move on to the acronym CUS, which stands for Carry, Use, Safety, and Storage. You're going to go through this acronym for each of the tools you're going to be using for the day. So for each tool, you're going to talk about how the volunteers are going to carry the tool, how to use the tool, so that's both how you wield the tool to get the action you want out of it, and what restoration activities are appropriate to use that tool with. Any safety thoughts that need to be addressed with the tool, and how to store the tool whenever a volunteer is not using it and whenever a volunteer is taking a break. One rule that we enforce at all our restoration events is we never use power tools, ever. Now I'm going to go through the CUS acronym with a few basic tools that you'll be using at most of your volunteer events, so you can see an example of a safety talk for different tools. So I'm going to speak as though I'm addressing volunteers standing in front of me. These are loppers, and loppers are used for cutting blackberry canes or larger English ivy vines. One thing we want to think about whenever we're using loppers is the rule of thumb. So anything that we cut with the loppers needs to be smaller than the size of our thumb. And if you are going to be cutting something that is larger than your thumb, then a handsaw is the tool for you. When we're using loppers, we're going to open them up using both hands on the handles and close them, just a really basic method of shutting them. And we're going to make sure that we don't wobble the handles back and forth, because that can cause the tool to break. When we're not using the loppers, when we're standing and holding them, we're going to put our outer hand on the lower handle and tuck the tool near our side so that the upper handle is towards our armpit. The point or the blade of the lopper should be facing forward and slightly towards the ground. When we're not holding or walking with the loppers and we want to set them down, we're going to go ahead and place them flat on the ground. It's really important to check to make sure that you're not taking the loppers and shoving them into soft dirt, because that can make the blade of the loppers get dull, and then we aren't able to use them for our restoration events for as long as we would if they were sharp. And one thing that I forgot to mention is that thinking about the rule of thumb whenever we are using our loppers is we want to only have things that we're intending to cut near the blades of the loppers. So that means that we don't want any fingers or pants or loose clothing near. We only want to be cutting the vegetation that we're intending to cut whenever we use them. The next tool we're going to talk about is the shovel. And I'm sure most of you have used a shovel at home, but we're still going to go over how to use it because we have some specific ways that we use the shovel whenever we're at restoration events. So the shovel is for digging and small cutting actions down low by your knees. So Whenever we're using a shovel for cutting, we want to place one hand towards the top and one hand on the middle of the shovel handle. And if we need some help sticking the spade in, we're going to use just one foot on the edge. A shovel's not a pogo stick, and if you do try to use one like it, you'll probably just fall right over. And that's not fun for anyone. So we use 1 foot to push the shovel in. And be sure that whenever you're lifting dirt up, you're not flinging it. You can just set it right next to you. When you're using the shovel in a cutting motion, you're going to want to use both hands close together on the handle and just use little action. So the shovel should only come about 6 inches off the ground and head straight down. As a safety thought around the shovel, the tip of the shovel is sharp and the edges are sharp. And so we want to make sure that at all times, whether we're using the shovel or we're holding the shovel, the base of the shovel should always stay at our knee level or below, and the tip of the shovel should always be pointed towards the ground. So when we are carrying the shovel, whether we're standing or we're walking, we're going to use 1 or 2 hands and carry the shovel to our sides. Again, thinking about the tip of that shovel being at our knee level or below. And when we're walking, we're just going to want to hold it out to the side with the tip pointed down. When we're not using or carrying the shovel, the proper way to put it on the ground is tip first and then lay it flat. And we do this because cartoons do mimic real life. If the shovel is flipped over and the tip is pointing up and someone steps on it, it will lean up and smack you in the face. A good way when you're working with kids to have them think about this is you can just ask them, have you cartoon-proofed your shovel when you set it down? And that is the 2 basic lopper and shovel safety. After you've done your tool safety talk, you can move on to making sure that all of your volunteers are wearing the correct personal protective equipment, for short PPE, and that refers to anything they're wearing on their physical person. So we recommend that volunteers wear long sleeve shirts and long pants, and every volunteer should be wearing closed-toed shoes. This is going to be especially important if your volunteers are really getting into the vegetation, ripping up that ivy and getting into blackberry canes, especially because those blackberries, those thorns can be pretty vicious. When you are packing for an event, think about if you're going to be working with blackberry, and if you are, you may want to pack a few pairs or multiple pairs of those leather gloves because it's harder for the blackberry thorns to get through them. If your restoration activity is going to be working in a really bushy area or cutting lots of things, you may want to also consider packing a few pairs of sunglasses or clear glasses or some hard hats so that you can protect those sensitive parts of your volunteers' bodies. After you've checked to make sure everyone's wearing the proper gear, you can move straight into site hazards. So we're going to want to make sure that we're orienting our volunteers to the site. Think about reminding your volunteers that we are working in an urban park, and that means that we're going to come across things that are unique to urban settings. So there is a pretty high chance that your volunteers may be running into things like broken glass or needles or even a homeless encampment, and if they do find any of that stuff, just tell them to come to you and you can deal with it. So if it's some kind of trash, you can dispose of that properly, or if it's a homeless encampment, you're going to make sure you need to tell the local authorities or whoever's appropriate for that. Before your event, you should put together an emergency response form that has the numbers and contact info for all of the local authorities, the nearest hospital, and if there is some kind of incident, make sure that you're letting your Green Cities representative know. Lastly, you're going to want to go over your restoration site boundaries and point out any steep slopes, holes, or hazardous areas in your site, and also point out any kind of plant that is poisonous or might sting your volunteers while they're working around it. Now that you're done with your tool safety talk, your volunteers have been working away and getting lots of restoration work done. While they're doing their restoration work, it's important to think about taking breaks and scheduling that time to either take breathers, to drink water, or to eat snacks. Restoration work can be pretty physically exhausting, and so it's important that as the volunteer leader, you're both scheduling time in to take those breaks and you're modeling taking those breaks. Feel free to halt the restoration work and give volunteers a time to drink up on the water that you provided or the water that they brought and eat snacks. This is especially important if the volunteer event runs during a mealtime or is very long. Remember, while you're working, be safe, have fun, and get the work done. Having large restoration events can be great because having lots of volunteers can help get a lot of restoration work done, but at the same time, there are a lot of details that go into planning those kinds of events. You're going to want to make sure that you're really well prepared. When you are planning a restoration event with lots of volunteers, you may want to consider having a pre-event site meeting so that you can have all your details planned out and organized. When you are having on the day of your restoration event, it's a good idea to break your volunteers up into smaller groups. Each smaller restoration group should have their own restoration leader. Keep in mind when you are assigning people to those groups that volunteers that come to the event together will probably want to be in a group together, and limit those group sizes to no more than 15 people per restoration lead. Depending on the training of your restoration leader, you can have your tool safety talk in the smaller groups or the larger group. It's up to you to decide what's more appropriate. When you are sending your groups out to meet in their smaller groups, when you're sending your volunteers out to meet in their smaller groups, make sure that those areas where they're meeting their restoration leader are clearly marked. You can use flagging if that will help visually volunteers know where to go. When you're planning to have multiple groups at a restoration site, make sure that the boundaries that each group is working in are clearly marked and that there's enough work for all of the restoration groups to work the whole entire time. If you are having a really large event, it's a great idea to invite elected officials, VIPs, and the press to your event. And a great way to drum up energy about your event is to send out a press release. If you need help writing one, you can talk to your Green Cities representative. Now that your restoration volunteers have been working the whole entire event, you're going to want to continue that energy into your event conclusion. So to start off, you're going to want to end your event about 15 minutes before your scheduling end time so that you have enough time to have a good cohesive event wrap up. Why is it important to have a good wrap up? Having that time allows you to get your tools all organized, and it also gives you time to help the volunteers reflect on the restoration work that they've done during the event, and for you to connect that work to the larger restoration work that's happening throughout our region. During your event wrap up, you're going to want to celebrate the volunteers for the work that they've been doing and really thank them for coming out and spending time with you during the day. This is a great time to really focus how their efforts tie into the work that's being done at this park or gulch and in the whole entire partnership. This is also a great opportunity to ask them what their favorite part about the event was, or if they can think of any ways that you might improve in the future. It's a good idea to direct them to your Green City Partnership website so that they can find out more events in the future to volunteer with, and let them know about any events that are happening at this park in the future. Most importantly, give them a major thank you and send them off with a smile. Great job! You sent your volunteers away with a smile, feeling very thanked. Give yourself a big pat on the back. You just had a great restoration event where you got a lot accomplished and your volunteers had fun. You're almost done. To finish up your event, you're going to want to collect any trash that's in the area. We want to make sure that we're not contributing to the waste stream in our park or gulch. Head over to your tools. Make sure that you have all your tools that you brought with you. This is where that count that you did at the beginning event is going to come in handy. Recount your tools, make sure they're all here. If you are missing some, you're going to have to check around the restoration site to see if you can find them. It's important that when we're done with our tools at the event, we're making sure that they're nice and clean and all the dirt's wiped off them. That's going to help our tools not rust so that we are able to use them longer for our restoration work. Now that your home and your restoration event is all done, it's time to make sure that you turn in the proper forms to your Green Cities representative, and that's going to be the volunteer sign-in that your volunteers signed whenever they first arrived at the event, and the work log that you fill out about the work that you accomplished during the restoration event. Make sure that any tools you borrowed are returned to whoever you borrowed them from, and we would love to see any photos or great stories and take-homes you had from the event. You can send those digitally to your Green Cities representative because we'd love to hear about your successful event. Today we've been talking about different tools and techniques you can use while you're managing volunteers at your restoration site. I'm going to go ahead and summarize a few of the basic ideas that we've touched on during this training so you can keep them in mind. We started with event setup. So first of all, setting up your welcome table so that you have all the essentials out. Having your first aid kit, your volunteer sign-ins with pens, information about the partnership, and water and snacks for your volunteers. Then we talked about having a good introduction so that your volunteers are tying in the work they're doing during the event with the bigger idea of the partnership and the work that's happening throughout the city and the region. We moved on to tool safety, where we talked about the CUS acronym, touching on carrying, use, safety, and storage for all the tools that you're going to be using to your event. While your volunteers are working, it's important to take those scheduled breaks so that volunteers have time to drink and eat during the event so that they're not getting dehydrated and tired and they can enjoy themselves. Finally, when all the work is done, having a great wrap-up so that volunteers understand how the work they're doing today at the park or the Gulch ties in with the greater efforts of restoration that are happening throughout the region. I hope that this training has been useful for you and you feel like you have the tools to more effectively and safely manage volunteers at your restoration events. Remember, this is just one of the many resources that the Green City Partnerships has for you to learn, and we hope you're watching all the videos of this training series. If you have any questions that have come up during this training, please shoot a Green City representative an email or give them a call. We'd love to talk with you. And remember our motto, be safe, have fun, and get the work done.